And you are a professor of sustainable chemical and material engineering at Sheffield in the United Kingdom.
Yes.
And he leads the Green Nanomaterials Research Group with a vision to develop sustainable routes to functional nanomaterials. He is an inventor, an educator, and a mentor. And the title of the presentation is Bioinspiration for Sustainability. As a former chemical engineer, I am looking forward to this presentation.
Thank you very much, Jake. Can you all hear me and see my screen?
I can hear. I don't see any screens.
So I've started sharing my screen.
I see your screen now, yes.
Okay. So is it okay to get going?
Sure.
Okay. So thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Siddharth, and I'm based in Sheffield. If you want to know more about our group and our work, then please follow this link, which is svplab.com, or you can follow us on Twitter. And today's topic is how can we learn from biology to make things more sustainable? In a nutshell, if we so this is some pictures I've shown on the left-hand side are some microorganisms and how we learn from them in order to translate that into making sustainable methods, sustainable materials and processes for future. So let's get into that topic. The outline of what I'm going to present is a little bit of background about where I am based and the university. Then background about the technical aspects of today's presentation. Then I will present the problem that we and others are facing and provide a solution, which is through bioinspiration. I will briefly mention the key inventions that we have been working on and what potential impacts they can lead to, and we will summarize this. Given the wider backgrounds of our audience, I'm going to sometimes dive in deeper into the technical aspects, but very quickly come out into more layman aspects. So if you think it's too much technical, then just give me another minute and I'm definitely going to come back and get back to normal pace. Before I go ahead, I really want to thank all my current and past group members who have made these things possible. They are researchers from all over the world who come and work with me for their PhD or undergraduate projects, or are also postdoctoral scientists. Of course, all my collaborators across the world, not just locally and nationally, and all the funders who have been supporting our work for a number of years. So Sheffield is actually known as a steel city. So it was a steel hub during the boom of steel manufacturing. It's in the middle of the United Kingdom, very close to Manchester and not so far from London. It's actually a really, really green city, as you can see from some of the facts I'm showing and some of the pictures I'm showing. And one of the things we are really proud of in Sheffield is the trees to people ratio. It's quite high. And these are the pictures I have taken from places which are between 5 to 10 minutes drive from our house, which is in the city itself. Now, the university is quite big. It belongs to the prestigious Russell Group, and it is quite highly ranked both in the world and in the UK. It has a rich history, quite wide number of departments, and large student population. The department I'm based in is Chemical and Biological Engineering. It's one of the largest chemical engineering departments in the UK. It is rated #1 for research environment, and also our students have ranked us quite highly for their satisfaction on their education that we provide. In addition, we work on lots of research themes which tackle 21st century challenges, and these themes are processes and systems, biological engineering, sustainability, which is what I will be talking about today, and materials and products, which is also an example I will take. We've made a lot of investment in new infrastructure. We have large cohort of students coming in and graduating every year. We are recognized through funding by many diverse funders, and we have more than 200 researchers who come from all parts of the world to embark on these research challenges. Okay, so let's dive into some of the technical aspects I want to talk about today. So if we look around, we may not realize, but there are more than 2,000 consumer products that use nanomaterials and a lot more industrial products that use nanomaterials. And very briefly, if you look at between 2006 and 2011, the number of products that use nanomaterials have grown linearly. And currently we have crossed 2,000 products. And let's see where these products are used. So as you can see from the pie charts, a vast majority of them are used in health and fitness, but many other sectors are also catching up. And within the health and fitness sector, you can see nanomaterials are used in products used for cosmetics, personal care, clothing, sporting, filtration, and we've already seen a water filtration talk before this one, sunscreens, and lots of other things. So in a nutshell, nanomaterials present wonderful future opportunities for all of us. Before we go into more technical details, let's look at what is nano, because I'm fairly aware that a lot of people may not have heard about nano before or may not know what it is. So let's take a scale, and what I'm showing here on the bottom is 1 meter long scale, and on the top it's the nanometer length scale. So if you take a 4-year-old, and I have one of those running around, and he might come into this presentation in any minute, they're about 1 meter tall, and that's 1 billion nanometers. If you look slightly smaller, some shells and other things, and there's a reason I've shown shells here, which I'll explain in next few slides. Then looking at cells, bottom is a schematic of a cell, and the top is actually a cell of radiolarian, which lives in aquatic environments. They are of 1 to 10 or sometimes 100 micron sizes. Something that is very topical at the moment is viruses. They are about 10 nanometers or slightly less in size. And proteins that make up these viruses and other biological systems are slightly smaller, of 1 to 10 nanometer length scales. And then we have molecules, which are shown on the top, and atoms, which are shown on the bottom, which is about 1 nanometer or less. So that's scale. And I've shown what we can see by naked eye and what we can't see by naked eye. But on that scale, the very bottom end, which is between 1 to 100 nanometers length scale. So what I'm going to focus on in today's lecture is about the nanoscale and the materials which are in. Okay, so let's listen to a video. If you can't hear the audio from.
We don't hear anything.
Okay,
so all of us, knowingly or unknowingly, use a lot of nanomaterials. For example, in sunscreens, in separation or water filtration, and also in industrial cases. But when we look at the manufacturing of these nanomaterials, a clear issue comes out, which is the amount of waste created when producing these nanomaterials. An analysis has shown that when we want to make 1 kilogram of nanomaterial, between several thousands to 1 million kilograms of waste is produced. And there are several reasons why this amount of waste is created. And these reasons include the need for high purity feedstock, which requires purification and high energy inputs.
So just pausing to check, you can hear the volume audio from the video.
Yes,
Okay.
we hear it.
Yes,
perfectly.
sounds great. Thank you.
It also comes to low yields of production, so only between 5 to 10% of the starting material ends up into the product. The requirement for sequential processing, which means that at each step or at each sequence, we are producing waste and it simply gets multiplied. In some cases, we have toxic chemicals being used or toxic or hazardous byproducts being produced, which contaminate the waste. And also need for specialized environments such as high vacuum or high temperatures or long duration at high temperatures. And all these cases require high amount of potable water and high amount of energy inputs, which we could have otherwise used for sustaining human life.
So there seems to be a tension between getting high quality nanomaterials that we really want for easing our lives, but also looking at the sustainability of their manufacturing and indeed their use. And how can we actually ease that tension so that we can make high quality materials which are still sustainable. So one of the ways we look at it is bioinspiration. So how can we learn from biology to solve real life problems? And before going on to our own inventions, I just want to give you a flavor of how this has been done in the past. And obviously Velcro is something that we all know. Imagine this problem. Little boys and girls always struggle with shoelaces. But we also know that these blur plants come and stick to our clothes and sweaters and other things. So how can we use the blur plants to create Velcros such that all the youngsters don't have to get tied up in tying their shoes? So it's actually a hook and a loop kind of mechanism that blur plant use, and that's how Velcro has been invented. Another example is climbing gear. 10 marks for guessing what that picture is and who is in that picture. But you would think that it's actually glue doing this. No, actually there is no glue. The stickiness comes from an inspiration taken from gecko. And if you look at gecko's paws, it has multi-length scale structures. And something I've shown here in the green oval that can be zoomed in looking at a high resolution electron microscopes. And you can see lots and lots of fibers or antenna coming out. And if you look even more closely in that blue area, you can see that there's a bundle of fibers. And if you look at the tip of those bundles, even at higher resolution, now look at the scale bar here, it's 1 micron, which means each of these hairs coming out are in the nanoscale. And there's plenty of these things. And what they do is they improve the number of contact points, which creates a lot stronger forces to hold and stick. Another example that's catching up recently is waterproof paint inspired by lotus leaf. And what it does is it creates hydrophobic surface such that water, instead of spreading as shown in this drop, actually curls up and doesn't like to contact on the surface, which is common of a lotus leaf, and it doesn't wet the lotus leaf surface. And again, if you zoom into what is happening at the micro and nano length scale, you can see lots of these structures, nanoscale structures that create such a hydrophobic environment that water droplets cannot spread around. So moving on to our own specific case, can we use bioinspiration as a nano solution? And if you look around, there are lots and lots of familiar examples of biominerals or biomaterials that are actually nanomaterials, but made at eco-friendly conditions. Simple examples are shells, pearls, our teeth, bones, and some of the examples that I'm interested in are microalgae called diatoms. So we probably can learn from these, which can lead to green roots, yet make high value nanomaterials. So I'm again going to show a quick video talking about the microalgae, which you can see from the picture on the top right in my slide. They essentially grow as green stuff on ponds. We've all seen them, but we simply don't recognize what they are.
So one of the examples we're looking at in terms of materials is silica, which is SiO2. And there are microalgae called diatoms, which grow in ponds and also in drinking water and sometimes. They produce biological silica. So diatoms selectively uptake the precursor for silica, which is essentially dissolved rocks in any water environments. It then uptakes that and concentrates it within the cell, and those concentrated pools of the precursor are taken to the site of silica deposition. Now, at the site of the silica deposition, there are proteins and other organic molecules which pre-assemble into the final form, and as the precursor arrives there, it catalyzes the formation and also the templates the formation of biological silica, thereby making a cell wall, which is what the diatoms use for their protection.
So these seem pretty amazing, and we can learn a lot from these materials, and that's what we have been doing, looking at these diatoms and many similar systems. And our ethos has been learning from biology and taking it to the technology. So we observe things, we try to understand, make sense of that, and then apply and adapt them to our needs. Going a little bit deeper into how we do this, specifically, we've actually written a book about this. And if you want more information, you can go on this website, which is greennanobook.com. And we've created a methodology or a pathway where we start from these biominerals, try to learn from them, how do they work at atomic and molecular length scales, develop some of these catalysts or additives that we call, which can lead us to making lots and lots of beautiful and useful nanomaterials. We can then develop their applications in pharmaceutical, in carbon capture, and many other examples, and work on their large-scale manufacturing such that now we have eco-friendly nanomaterials which can be manufactured using a sustainable route. So I'm going to dive into our invention. How we have used that methodology is one example where we have reduced the temperature of manufacturing from 600 degrees Celsius to 20 degrees Celsius. And I'll elaborate that with this slide. So an old method which required to use some of these molecules which I've shown as red circles with blue tails, and the synthesis of these nanomaterials required more than a day and higher temperatures, more than 80 degrees Celsius in their first step. What they produce is nanomaterials which are impure. So all these pink things that I've shown here are these starting molecules that get trapped inside. So these materials are not pure. And in order to purify them, we have to burn them, which is what calcination is. And that requires 600 degrees Celsius for 6 hours. That's tremendous amount of energy input that we require, which results into pure high value porous silica in this particular case. But if you look at the amount of energy and resources used, it's extremely high. And that has been causing barrier in commercialization of these materials for nearly 2 decades, so more than 20 years since their invention. What we have done is we've learned from biology and developed these bio-inspired additives shown on the bottom left of my screen. And what they enable us to do is 2 things. One, we can now synthesize these materials at room temperature within 5 minutes. So that's a lot of energy and time saving. We still make these intermediate impure materials, but then the second step, we can purify these materials again at 20 degrees Celsius in 5 minutes in water. And instead, we can now get high value porous bio-inspired silica. The added advantage of this method is that because we're not burning anything off, after the purification, we can recycle pretty much everything, including water and these original organic additives that we have, back into our synthesis. So that's highly resource efficient and energy efficient method. So we've now created a highly sustainable method which has huge savings of energy and resources. And we've done a lot of technical calculations, and if anyone is interested, they can get in touch with us to learn about more of these things. So coming out of a lot of these technical aspects, what does this enable us? So first of all, given the low energy requirements, this method can now be scaled up at large scale, which was not possible before because of high energy requirements, making it really, really costly and unsustainable. So we can make these materials at large scale, but we can also reduce the cost of existing materials. So for example, where these materials are used in everyday products, we can now make better quality materials, but also perhaps at lower cost. We can make some high value materials such as catalysts that are used in refining and other types of industry. But more importantly, these materials are now enabling new products which were not possible before. So we have been testing these materials for pharmaceutical excipients, for energy related systems such as carbon capture, or even making battery electrodes, and in water treatment, as was highlighted as the importance in the previous lecture. So it opens up lots of new and exciting opportunities for future. So what we are doing in future is we really want to invent and keep inventing sustainable routes to functional nanomaterials such that they have really top quality properties. The processes are efficient and sustainable. yet economical. We want to make everything environmentally viable, and look at lots and lots of different applications. So currently in my group, we are looking at the core, which is the green nanomaterials chemistry and engineering, to apply to energy sector, to manufacturing sector, to biomedical materials, making catalysts and biocatalysts, and also in environmental remediation. So these are the avenues we are taking, and we really think that these inventions will reach market one day. So let me summarize.
So what we have seen so far is discovery and implementation of a green or sustainable manufacturing method for nanomaterials. And this method offers significant advantages, such as it is really a fast process. It occurs at room temperature, it occurs in water, it occurs at ambient pressure, so does not require high or low pressures. And the unreacted material has the potential to be recycled. That includes the feedstock and also the organic additives. All these benefits come together, actually compound in terms of providing huge amount of potential in terms of making cost-effective yet high-value nanomaterials. So what we have seen so far.
So in summary, for all the young inventors around, I would say look around, get inspired, and go invent all new discoveries that you want to make. And with that, I would like to thank you all and end my presentation here, and happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Wow, I was very impressed with that. That was great. I love the way you went through the whole process and talked about what was going on. But one thing I'd love to have you clarify is nanomaterials are very small, but they're just not small. They actually have different chemical and physical properties. Can you talk about the different chemical and physical properties of nanomaterials and why they might be useful and valuable in some of these products?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll give a very simple example. If I take a football, it has a given surface, and all the youngsters can tell you that the volume of that football is 4 pi r cube, and the surface is 4/3 pi r square. Now, if you take that ratio of how much surface is available in a given volume and keep that on one side, and now if I chop that football into two halves, where my knife cuts it, it now creates two surfaces on both sides. So now we have, for the same volume, more surface available. And if I chop it 1 billion times, I'm going to get those 1 billion times more external surface for the same volume. So I have now increased dramatically the amount of surface for the given volume, which means that now those particles or nanoparticles or nanofootballs can interact significantly more with the external environment. And that external environment could be air, could be sunlight, could be reactants or molecules, all sorts of different things. So now within the same volume, we have the ability to trigger all sorts of things at much larger amounts. And that's one specific aspect. And as a result of that, we have many atoms present on the surface rather than inside, which are keen to interact with the external environment. So they can catalyze reactions. They can have some really beautiful optical phenomenon that can give you color, or that can act as triggers, that can conduct electricity in lots of other applications. And that's the real underlying principle. And that means that many other properties that we see in bulk materials are actually different in nanomaterials, and we can have lots of new avenues and new areas.
Yes, very much. One of the other things you talked about was the fact that you improved the process by doing things at a lower temperature. You couldn't just lower the temperature. You must have been doing something else, because if it worked at a lower temperature, why did they go to a higher temperature? Can you talk about the other factors that contributed to the success of the process at the lower temperature?
Right, that requires me to summarize about 15 years work across the world in 2 sentences. So what actually we did
three
was,
sentences.
three sentences, okay, with colons and semicolons. So what we did essentially was understood at the molecular and atomic length scales how biology does this. So we looked at the proteins and the molecules that biology uses and interacts with the precursors and the final nanomaterials. at atomic length scale and molecular length scales, and tried to mimic those principles using some synthetic molecules. And those molecules have specific interactions with these nanomaterials, such that now the energy required is much lowered because we are using much higher type of interactions, which also results in the fact that we can tune those interactions and switch them off when we want them, which is what we use in the purification example. Is then we switch them off and those molecules just get washed out in aqueous solutions. I think those are 4 sentences.
Okay. I don't want to keep hogging the stage here with these questions, but I'm sorry. As an ex-chemical engineer, I get enthusiastic about this. Everything we do has unintended consequences. And I know with nanomaterials, there's lots of positives, but there are also some negatives. There's some things that we didn't quite expect that might happen, and there's some problems. I'm not asking you to talk about them because we should say, no, we shouldn't use nanomaterials. But if we are aware of potential problems, then we can adjust and make corrections for them. So can you talk about some of the things with nanomaterials that may be not quite as beneficial as we had hoped?
So I think I would look at 2 separate areas. One area is actually making them, which is what I was talking about. And the other area is using them. So when we are using them, we need to be aware of their properties and their fate. How do they interact with the environment where they're going to be used, and where do they end up? So in a lot of cases, they don't end up anywhere. They stay where they were, which is perfect. But then we have to think about how they interact. But if they are used such that they escape, or they are supposed to escape in the environment, then we need to know how they interact with the environment. What do they do, and what are the dangers, or what are the things that we need to be aware of? And like any drug, for example, we have side effects. So we have to balance out the value of using them, the benefits of them, and the risk associated with them. Now, again, the risks come with not just the size, but also the chemistry. So not all nanomaterials chemistries will cause problems, but then there are some that will. So examples are catalysts, which are supposed to trigger certain reactions, and therefore they will go out in the environment and trigger reactions, sometimes unwanted ones. But systems such as silica that are used even in food and cosmetics, they don't cause much problem because of their benign surface chemistry. So we have to understand these things and be carefully evaluating what their consequences are.
Great. Because the nanomaterials that you're using are, very frankly, much smaller than the coronavirus, have you been approached by pharmaceutical companies asking you to make specific shapes and specific types of nanomaterials, maybe as an antiviral component?
I specifically haven't been, but I know colleagues who have been making really funky shaped nanomaterials have been thinking about doing this and interacting. So the flip side is that 10, 20 years ago, or starting then, people have been using viruses to make nanomaterials, to interface with nanomaterials and use their recognition ability. So that knowledge does exist. So a lot of colleagues across the world who are experts in that interface are looking at ways to actually trap the viruses or make them inactive. And yes, that's very topical.
Mm-hmm. And one more, I'm sorry. You talked about using silicon dioxide. Are there other chemicals, other materials that could be used as a base for nanomaterials besides silica?
Yeah, so lots and lots of different ones. I mean, we have ourselves worked on many oxides and metal nanoparticles, but there's a whole host of more than 50 odd nanomaterials that people have been working around in the world. So gold particles, platinum, palladium nanoparticles, zinc oxide, germania particles. Titania is a really good example because it can be used in water treatment as a photocatalyst. So a really wide range, and the methodology I showed is actually a generic methodology we have developed that can be applied to a lot of different chemistries. And one of the really high potential project we are working on at the moment is making battery electrodes or the materials required for battery electrodes using our method, because battery electrode materials require sometimes 1000 degrees Celsius temperatures.
we have students watching this, young students watching this, and I'm sure they're thinking, wow, sounds really interesting. What types of subjects should they take in high school and then later in college if they thought this field was interesting and wanted to pursue it?
Probably I'm not the best to advise because I dropped biology when I could, but then I relearned it during my PhD time because we were all learning from biology. But with hindsight, I think we need to look into multidisciplinary aspects, so learn as many subjects as possible, keep eyes open if opportunities are presented. Don't be scared to jump into new areas. And imagine somebody from high school onwards didn't learn biology, went into hardcore engineering, then came back and learned biology. So it's possible. Don't be scared. Jump into new areas. We have the capacity to learn lots of new interesting things, and we can actually drive ourselves to learn new areas.
Great. Very good. Very good. Thank you very, very much.